What you study at uni has so little bearing on your career unless you're like doing medicine or unless you're doing like engineering or something. If you're doing like a humanity or whatever, what you do in your spare time is everything. I'm a millennial. I have a different set of expectations. I have had a completely different trajectory career-wise to my parents, and they're always like, oh, you always leave jobs so soon, oh, you can't put up with things, you're not robust in the way that we are, you're not stoic in the way that we are. And I'm like, no, I'm literally not. I'm that kind of celebrant.
Yes.
Like, I write stories.
Yeah.
I tell people stories. That's what I do. I don't talk about these sort of grandiose concepts of marriage, childhood, family. I write stories about people and their love, their relationships, their experiences, their quirks and their values. And that again was like another moment where I was like, okay, I'm not going to do this necessarily the same as every celebrant. There's going to be a different approach that lots of people will take, but that's my approach.
Yeah. Welcome to In My Previous Life. I'm Jen Wakefield, and I used to be a primary school teacher, but I've since been a stand-up comedian, presenter and writer. In this podcast, we give you a chance to hear firsthand from people who have changed careers from one set pathway to a creative or purpose-led job role. This is not where you'll hear a rags to riches PR story like the ones you find in magazines, but a real, authentic take on what it's actually like to change lanes in your adult life. I'm so happy to be joined by Chloe Green. Nice to see you, Chloe.
Lovely to see you.
And Chloe, what were you in your previous life?
In my previous life, I was a political campaigner for the Labour Party, and now I am a wedding celebrant.
Wow, that is, I'm going to say, I feel like they're two different colours. I feel like, you've got red and then you've got vibrant, multicolour rainbow, exciting, lots of joy.
It's been a colourful transition.
And
my name is Chloe Green, so... I know.
Couldn't be more serendipitous.
Very
then.
Festive colours as well, red and green.
Yeah, and you're looking beautiful today in all your colours, by the way, Chloe.
So much.
But Chloe, I wanted to talk to you because I love that this is a story that could inspire lots of other people to make a complete pivot into something that is different. And I have noticed as well that there are more celebrants popping up. And I think it's quite an exciting thing because I think that a lot of people are choosing to have celebrations as well that are more personalised and less linked to kind of traditions and archaic sort of beliefs and things.
Yeah.
So I think that I do think it's really interesting to look at as a career generally. But I want to start by talking about your previous life and what life was like for you back then. Maybe how did you get into that role at the Labour Party?
Yeah.
And what was happening day to day?
Yeah, all good questions. I'm like, oh Christ, I need to really cast my mind back, and I've really repressed a lot of it, to be completely honest. It was a dark time. So I went to uni and did English literature, and I was always a really keen writer, very much knew that my career would be like kind of communication based.
Right.
Wasn't really sure what exactly that meant, but I'm all right with words, so I'll probably do something with words. And at uni I did a lot of like political activism, not actually for the Labour Party, but I was involved in like feminist campaigning and some like LGBT campaigning stuff, just like campus style stuff. And then that kind of led me to move towards like wanting to work after graduating in like the charity sector and doing like campaigning professionally. So my first job out of uni was as a copywriter for Anthony Nolan, which is a blood cancer charity.
Okay, yeah. And so actually the campaigning that you were doing in university was something that you were enjoying doing, and you were like, this feels... Was it because it was purposeful, or was it the way it made you feel? What was it about that made you think, I need to make this part of my life more permanently?
It was just a strong drive towards like seeking justice. Like I've always, when you're like, I don't know, 7 years old and you like write into, I don't know, like a TV show, or like I was like a big complainer. I was like, this isn't right. I don't like this. Do you remember Short Change, that TV show?
Yes, yeah. Did you write into Short Change?
It was my favourite TV show ever, but I did not have any injustice of my own. But I was just like, it's just like 8-year-old who was just like pissed off about, I don't know, my fruit pastels came and they were all yellow or whatever, and then you get a year's supply of fruit
I'd
pastels.
love to see the children's version of Short Change, to be fair. That would be good. But maybe it was about as well, it sounds like if you're enjoying watching that on behalf of other people, perhaps you like the fact that it's giving voice to other people. Maybe that's part of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And me and my mum don't share like any political beliefs particularly, which is a whole other podcast worth of chat. But she's really angled towards like justice and fair treatment, like in her own way.
Yeah.
You know, like my mum is 5 foot nothing, and thankfully I'm 5'8", so I didn't get her. I didn't get that from her. But like, you know, I remember being like in shops when we were like children, and if somebody got like served before her because they were taller or they were like more noticeable, she'd be like, excuse me, you know, full on like Karening.
Yeah, but I can totally relate to your mum as someone I'm 5'1" 3/4, Chloe. I mean, I do wear like a little chunky heel every now and again, sort of,
you've got a tall person energy, so I'd have never thought
that's the best thing you can say to a short person.
I'd never have said. I'd be like, oh, you're like 5'5" or something, you're like 5'6".
That's why I'm always a fan of a chunky heel, but I do know that as a short person, and my partner is also quite short, and we both feel like we sometimes have that extra layer of like hard done byness. We're like, we want to be heard, hear our voice, and I think it is a short person thing.
Well, there you go. My mum having like little man syndrome basically has led me to become a campaigner for the Labour Party. That's the
trajectory in the
2 + 2 = 1,000. But yeah, so I ended up kind of doing like what I was doing on campus, you know, just voluntarily campaigning and stuff professionally, and that was through copywriting. So that was through you know, just being the person that would like come up with the language around the campaigns, and that's what I did with Anthony Nolan, the blood cancer charity. And then the same thing after that, I did the same kind of job at St Mungo's, the homeless charity. And for NUS, the National Union of Students.
Oh wow, okay. So and these are all copywriting roles.
They were copywriting roles Anthony Nolan was called like junior copywriter, like that's what my job title was. But then at St Mungo's, it was like marketing and comms officer. And at NUS, it was like campaigns officer. But they were all just comms, basically.
Yeah,
they
comms
were just
roles.
Writing. Yeah.
And had you covered that in your degree, or did you very much learn in that Anthony Nolan role, like your first copywriting role?
Not even a bit. I went to like, you know, a snooty unit. Well, I say snooty, it was just Southampton University, but you know, it's kind of like a sort of traditional university.
Yeah.
So it had absolutely zero like pragmatic, you know, usable skills on the course. It was just, you know, fucking medieval literature, ye olde English, Shakespeare, you know, all of that. Actually, I really enjoyed the course. I don't want to disparage the course, but it was not about like modern communication.
Yeah, it didn't give you those skills to go, and here's how you can relate this to the workplace.
No, not even a bit. And I think it's just so interesting. And if I ever get the chance to speak to young people, which is very rare, but if I do, or when I do, I've always said like the stuff that you do at uni has no bearing on your career, what you study at uni has so little bearing on your career if, you know, unless you're like doing medicine or unless you're doing like engineering or something. If you're doing like a humanity or whatever, what you do in your spare time is everything.
Yeah, and this is exactly the theme popping up straight away with you, Chloe. And and I know you must have heard other people talk about this, about, you know, the thing you do when you're procrastinating or in your spare time or whatever is probably the thing you should be doing in your life.
It's the thing you choose to do when you don't have like a fire up your ass.
Yeah,
like, you know, when you're not being like held accountable by a tutor or a teacher or you know, an exam or whatever. The stuff you're choosing to do is the stuff that obviously is the thing that actually drives you. So and I mean, English literature, obviously I was writing all the time. I was writing creatively, so that was really like helpful and a good habit and good practice to be in. But yeah, had absolutely zero to do with like copywriting professionally. And then those early jobs, like my first couple of jobs out of uni, I, you know, was doing that for 3-4 years, and then my it was kind of leading me to recognize that actually, like, with the justice that I was seeking, with the work that I was doing campaigning with these 3 organizations in those roles, actually so many of the things that I was like campaigning for could all be changed by a Labour government. Like, they were all about actually like structural inequalities, policy changes that were aligned with like, you know, the Labour approach. So I was thinking, okay, I could just go to the source. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like I could
yeah.
just I could rather than, individualize each of these campaigns in that sense. All of this would be better under a Labour government. That remains my belief.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what then drove me to think, okay, I think I want to work actually for the Labour Party to, try and get them into government. So then I applied for the job at Labour as their social media manager, and I got the job. So that's then I guess the most meaty job I had. I was there for like 3.5 years, and that was a major career experience for me, like a transformative one.
And Chloe, can I ask, did the job come up and then you had these like series of thoughts about why this was a good idea, or had you thought about working for the Labour Party and then you found the vacancy?
So about maybe a year or two after I graduated, I had this kind of feeling like, I think the vehicle to what I want to see in the world is like a Labour government. So I joined the Labour Party.
Okay, got you.
Just as like an ordinary member, like went out door knocking and things at like local elections.
Yeah.
And then, and it was in 2016 that the job came up. Like it just was, advertised in ways that jobs are advertised. I think I saw it on like Guardian charity jobs or whatever like that, something like that. And then applied in like a totally normal way, sent my CV, sent a covering letter, had an interview, it's very normal stuff.
And how can they not pick you when you're already campaigning for them?
Stop
but like, that synergy of you being involved in it and then, looking out for things, like sometimes that I notice that pops up when people have opportunities that they take up or that come to fruition. It's this like meeting of two pathways.
Yeah, exactly. And I really I didn't think I would necessarily get the job because a lot of politics generally is like people have been to the same uni with people and people are friends with people and people, live in the same area as other people. And so they like connect like locally on local campaigns. They kind of know each other. It's like, I wouldn't go so far as to say like out and out at that kind of like junior staffer level, it's like nepotism because, at the very top, of course, it's nepotism. It's just people like bringing in the people that they trust, people bringing in their friends. But even at the sort of lower middle management, shall we say, level, it can be a bit like you do need to have like a foot in the door.
Yes.
And I didn't have a foot in the door. I didn't know anyone. I didn't have like friendships or connections. So that was like something I thought was a barrier. I thought that was a barrier.
Yeah.
And then just on the like merit of my professional experience, I got the job and I was just so pleasantly surprised. Like, oh, yeah, you can just get a job if you're good at the job. Like, ooh, what a crazy idea.
But nice to bring up that narrative that is probably in a lot of people's heads, because I think half the time people don't go for things because of the strong stories that they hold, especially about about politics, or media or publishing or anything, any industry where it feels hard to get in, there's a story circulating about it, and you obviously had one. But the fact that you went for it anyway and proved yourself wrong, and you were like, oh, I got this on my own merit, is a great feeling, but also a great story to tell other people as well.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it can just feel really exclusionary, those words, and you then self-censor, right? Like you then think, oh, there's no point, or I don't know the right people. I have to spend the next like 3 years, working for free as an intern in order to like get the paid gig or whatever. That was never an option for me. I would have never been able to do that. So it's like you already create, as you say, like that narrative in your head. Well, you haven't created the narrative. The narrative is out there and it's real.
Yeah.
You haven't made it up, but it becomes like self-fulfilling.
Yes,
because
absolutely.
then you don't apply, right?
Yeah, and it's not the only narrative, is what you're saying, and it's nice to sort of put that out there. Okay, so Chloe, you're now, let's say you're now sort of 6 months to a year into this role, and how's that going?
Oh God, I mean, cast your mind back, Jen, to 2016. It was a fucking shit show. Like we had a European referendum. We had the Donald Trump for Hillary Clinton election in the US. We had just internally within the Labour Party, there was just absolute nonsense going on with, a sort of vote of confidence in the leadership, and then a whole leadership election and some by-elections. And it was also Sadiq Khan's mayoral election.
Wow.
In
So it was
2016.
let's just say it was a vibrant year for the Labour Party.
Spicy little
Or
year.
just generally for everyone. And it was a year that people thought it couldn't get more spicy than this. But
yeah, womp womp.
Yeah.
We were wrong. Yeah, so it was a really... It truly unhinged political year. So it felt a bit like, God, what a poison chalice.
Yeah.
I've just walked into this workplace and the whole thing is just on fire. But, you know, in those, obviously, not to talk about Brexit, not to talk about Donald Trump, because, you know, people who have more interesting things to say about that can talk about those things. But you do create really close friendships in on fire buildings, shall we say?
Yeah, that's true.
You know, you do create, and you learn so much.
Yes.
Like, it was a baptism of fire. It was really a case of, oh God, the odds are really stacked against us. The political narrative, political discourse has gone absolutely off the rails. I can't remember if it was in 2016 or 2017. There was that there was that comment about, I think was it Michael Gove saying, like, we don't want to hear from any more experts or something. And it was like,
many
so
things he would have said,
the death of expertise. Like, okay.
Yeah.
So just, it was kind of a bit of a lesson in, the dark arts of social media campaigning and how totally derailed it had become, how unregulated it was, how it can swing elections, how it can be really scary, how the comment section of anything you post on social media, if you're the Labour Party, if you're a politician or whatever, is just a mire of shit.
Yeah, my goodness, because you would have been exposed to so much that you previously wouldn't have been.
No,
you weren't in this job.
I didn't see any of that before, and I knew it was happening. I wasn't dim to it, but of course then it was like, and it wasn't targeted at me, no one was like, Chloe Green, you're wrong and stupid. But it was like, oh, like, this tweet is wrong or stupid, or this content sucks, or you're a bunch of, this, that and the other. And I was the person like making the content, publishing the content, analysing the content's performance. So of course it did feel personal, even though of course it wasn't personal. No one knew it was me specifically behind any of that, but it was just frightening and unsettling.
Yeah, let's not forget this is your job, and how many hours you spend at your job, and how much of your, if it is something you know, especially when you've been a campaigner and it's something you believe in strongly, you are putting your heart and soul into it as well. It's not,
it's so personal.
It's not like something you can, where some people can turn up to a job and say, but some people are very good at closing the door on their job and having a separation. I think that sounds like it would be very hard to do.
In politics, no one ever does that. Like, people who work in politics, like, live it and breathe it. Like, you wouldn't believe how many, like, marriages exist within, like, the Labour staff team. Because people are like, it's actually hard to find someone beyond these four walls who really understands what this job means to me. So then, of course, people just start, like, creating close friendships and romantic relationships, within... And because you spend so much time together. That's the other thing. You spend so much time. I mean, we're not together anymore, but I was with my ex who I met at the Labour Party. We were together like 5.5 years.
Wow.
So you do become pretty wed.
Yeah.
Excuse the pun. Yeah. But you become pretty wed to the whole thing. Like, the building, the people, the lifestyle, the job. And I mean, imagining if I had been like the social media manager for like, I don't know, like Barclays or something. I don't know how much that person, whoever they are, I don't know how much that person like lives and breathes and loves Barclays, as opposed to, I'm really good at this job and I got this job because I'm good at what I do. But, come 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock, whatever, I slam my laptop shut and that's kind of the end of it for me until 9 o'clock the next morning.
Yeah.
I was working crazy hours. I cared.
What hours were you working, Chloe?
I mean, we were like basically on all the time. It was like around the clock, because with social media, obviously, when anything happens, people were expecting the Labour Party to say something about it.
Of course,
my kind of core hours, I guess, were like vaguely like 9 till 5:30 or 9:30 till 6 or something like that. Sort of a normal-ish office job kind of timeline. But I was like basically on call anytime. So weekends, evenings, like whenever something was happening in the kind of public sphere, in the political sphere, if it needed commenting upon and there needed to be like a tweet about it or a Facebook post about it or whatever, like I'm the one publishing that. I'm the one writing that and then putting it on the internet. So
and that's a lot on your shoulders in the sense that when you think about comms, you think, okay, my words are the vehicle to get the message out. But when you're working for something that is the message, that's a lot on your shoulders, isn't it?
Yeah. And just, you know, a challenge within that challenge was the people who obviously are, you know, taking care of like formulating what the message is. It wasn't me. I'm not the person who actually ultimately decides like what the party's line on something was. Of course I wasn't. I was the Twitter monkey that would, you know, write something and send it off. I wasn't the person making that shout. The person making that shout was the leader of the Labour Party or a politician or, you know, the leader of the Labour Party's right-hand person, etc. But those people don't really necessarily have social media skills, right? So they say, okay, our line on this is this. And then it would be my job to translate that onto social media, because that might be jargony as shit, 2 pages long. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can't just be like, cool, copy and paste, done. Because that's not what social media is. It's making something pithy, it's making something catchy, it's making something eye-grabbing, it's making something digestible in a really limited amount of characters.
And also on different platforms. So are you sitting and going, this is for Instagram, this is for Twitter, this is okay.
Exactly. And then, you know, so rare would it be we would just post like a plain text thing. Normally it was accompanied by a graphic or a video or like a piece to camera or something. So then I'm like scripting videos, I'm scripting little animations to explain the position in with more clarity, or I'm, you know, commissioning a graphic from our design team. And so it's like getting all of that through sign off is then, my God, like a minefield, because you're having to please so many people, and the politics within the politics is crazy.
Oh gosh.
You know, like, oh, that doesn't make such and such sound good enough, or that erases the contribution of this person, so you need to shove that in more, or this isn't actually our priority, so we don't want to say that at all, but someone else has told me I need to say that. You know, it's just
because they've all got different agendas.
Exactly.
Chloe, that's intense. That is intense. And so was there a shift or a turning point in this role where you were like, okay, something needs to change, and what was that like?
I was there for like 3.5 years, and I think when I decided to leave, it was like the summer of 2019. So I started at the start of 2016. It was the summer of 2019, and again, it's a whole other chat of like why I decided to leave in the end, but I was miserable. Like, I was really stressed up to a point of stress that like I didn't think previously was possible.
Wow.
You know, every kind of threshold was just crossed, and it would just keep ratcheting up. So you think like, oh, my red line is this, and if I go past my red line, I'm out of here. And then the red line, you go above it, and then the red line becomes just irrelevant. Like, you know, it's been crossed so much, you can't even see it anymore. So then you've got a new red line, and then that gets crossed, and it was just one thing after another.
What was the impact, if you don't mind expanding a bit on your life in terms of how that stress manifested? Like, for example, for me, and I've written about this before, I suffer with insomnia, which I think is a very real sign of stress, where and still do really to now, although I found ways of managing it, but it definitely popped up at a time where things were feeling, I couldn't really pinpoint it, but it popped up at a time where things were kind of, lots of different projects and things were up in the air, and it was obviously my body's way of saying something's happening here. How did that look for you?
I had severe anxiety, like panic attacks, and it wasn't just from the work, it was like my whole life around this, you know, the whole ecosystem was just conspiring to make me very miserable. And I don't mean to sound passive. I don't mean to say, the ecosystem. Like, I'm in the middle of that. It was my choice. Those were my choices, and I was making those choices actively. But I recognized, oh God, like I am like randomly crying all the time. Why am I crying? Like, I'm not a big crier. I don't cry very much. These days, I'm so much happier. I probably cry, I don't know, once a month, like a cheeky little monthly cry, something like that. Like that's like
I love that, a cheeky monthly cry. That's what I'm going to call it when it comes around.
Yeah. Here it is. Here she comes.
Cute.
Yeah, like probably something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
In times of stress, maybe a bit more or whatever. But it wasn't like a big like outlet emotionally for me. And then suddenly I was crying all the time. So I was like, God, this is like data. Like I have to listen to this data because this is not ordinary. This is not normal. This is not how I typically respond to stress and difficulty. And I had a couple of panic attacks. I had a panic attack at work in response to a very awful like conversation I had with a colleague where I didn't think I was being treated very well. And rather than it just being like, oh, what a jackass, like fuck that guy, I cried and went into full-blown panic attack. So I was thinking, oh God, like my defenses are so low. I really can't cope with the onslaught, and I don't have any like immunity to this anymore. It's not like, oh, you get knocked around a bit, but you've got your tough skin. It was like my skin by the end of it was like paper thin. And so nothing was like, I had nothing left in the tank. Yeah. And it was at that point where I was like, yeah, I must go because I think I might collapse. And it's really wild because some people go and work at the Labour Party and they'll go through that dip where they're like, oh, this is a really interesting job and I feel really inspired and I feel really motivated and this is the job I've wanted for years and now I've got it. Yes. Oh God, wow. Okay, the reality of this is it sucks and it's hard and people aren't very nice necessarily all the time and it's pretty cutthroat. Okay, and then they develop a thick skin and then somehow they just manage to roll with the punches for like 20 years.
Yeah.
Some people were there for 20 years. Some people I worked with were part of the 1997 landslide for Tony Blair.
Wow.
And then they were like, working on their like 1 billionth general election in 2019 or whatever. And they were like, yep, here we go again. And they had just created like I don't know how they had done it, but a robustness over those years.
Yeah, I find that in teaching as well. Like there are teachers who are for all different reasons. I couldn't assume it's just because of their purpose. Perhaps a lot of them, perhaps it is that they came into this as a purpose-led job role and they think, this is my vocation, this is my life, and this is what I'm dedicating it to. But yeah, I find that there are people, and I'd find year after year we'd have the same conversations. But for me, I was like, I just don't want to keep going on the same route.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And I think those people that make that choice and then stick it out and they're there for a really long time, I don't know if that's as you say, like it's their vocation, they've made that decision and they're kind of like a marriage, like, well, I'm in this now and I'm actually going to give it my all. And, divorcing from this situation actually would take quite a lot, it would actually take quite a lot for me to think that there's a better alternative somewhere else. I'm wed to this. But for me, I did that crunch and I was like, yep, done. Like I was like, I'm out. That's me. Like I'm not that person. I don't have that character. I also have I think because of that, like, I don't know, that nature, I expect a lot. Like I expect my jobs to be very meaningful. I mean, my parents are from a different generation, they're baby boomers, they're stoics. Like they had the same jobs for decades because they didn't have much choice, living in a small town, but also they didn't expect very much necessarily of their working conditions. Whereas I'm a millennial, I have a different set of expectations. I have had a completely different trajectory career-wise to my parents, and they're always like, oh, you always leave jobs so soon, oh, you can't put up with things, you're not robust in the way that we are, you're not stoic in the way that we are. And I'm like, no, I'm literally not. Like, I'm a different age, I have a different perspective completely, and I expect a lot from my work. And it was not just like it wasn't fulfilling the things I wanted it to fulfill, it was crushing my spirit. So I just was like, nah, I'm outie. So I left in 2019. And then
did you leave with something to go to, Chloe?
Nope.
Okay, no, wow. So you actually were like, there's enough signals here telling me I've got to go. I actually need to get out for my own sanity and health.
I crashed and burned.
And completely burned out.
Yeah, I crashed and burned hard. But it actually, I mean, this was so sort of unexpected and strange. I had I had applied for one job when I was at Labour, thinking like, yeah, I want to get out, but I don't really understand what it is that I do next. Where do I go from here? Am I a social media manager? And I go and do other social media manager roles, for Barclays. Not that would be my vibe, but you know what I mean? Something like that. Do I become a social media manager and that's my trajectory and I go in that direction? Or do I stay in politics and I have a different role, but within politics, or for an MP or for someone within that world, but it's not the same set of skills that I use, but it's the same industry. Where do I go? And I only found one job in that time. I wasn't actively looking. It wasn't like, there's only one job for me, but I just found it. I fell upon it and I was like, okay, yeah, that's interesting. And it was for an agency who did like political campaigning and fundraising and sort of like activism and what we call like mobilization for charities. And it was using everything of that kind of like political activist mobilization kind of model, but for charities and campaigning organizations. And it was to be their head copywriter, so head of creative. Yeah. And I saw that role and I was like, I know how to do that, and it takes me back to the charity sector, but I don't have to go in-house at a charity. I don't have to pick one. I could work with dozens. Yeah. And that kind of agency model, appealed to me because it's variety, it keeps things fresh, it's fast-paced. So I applied for that job, and then I didn't get it. And I was really gutted because I thought, damn, I've got loads of experience. That's a bummer. Like, this was the job I'd seen, and I hadn't seen many others that interested me in the same way. So, bummer. Okay. Yeah. I got rejected on one week. The following Monday, I decided to quit the Labour Party, a couple of weeks after I got this rejection. I quit the Labour Party on the Monday, knowing I had nothing to go to. And I was like, I'll figure it out. Like, I need to figure that out quickly because I don't have the financial means to not, but I'll figure it out. Yeah. And then I think it was like the Wednesday or Thursday. It was within the same week. I got a call from the guy who ran the agency who had rejected me. And he was like, we've made a mistake. We changed our mind. Will you come and do the job? And I was like, whoa. What? Like, what? What do you mean? What do you mean? And like, this is kind of, I don't know, detail that maybe I don't need to give, but I was their second choice, and we had gone neck and neck, so much so that they made us do another round of like a test. Okay, wow. Because we were like scored the same, and so they were like, we need to figure out like what the differential here is. So we did another test, and I'd scored one or two things less than this other person, and then they changed their mind because this person who they had chosen, their references didn't check out.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So there you go. Never lie in an interview process. Never. I don't know what the lie was. I don't know if it was a fib. I don't know if the reference just came back and it wasn't 1000% enthusiastic. I don't know what happened. But it just suddenly came around and bit that person in the ass. And it meant that they were like, we want you. Do you want to come back? And I was like, well, that is so interesting that you say that, because I just quit. Like, this week I quit with nothing to go to. Full disclosure. Like, I was just going to be unemployed for a month or whatever. Yeah. So that's superb timing. Like, this is great timing.
That's brilliant. And actually, I'm so glad you included this detail, because there are some nice kind of patterns I notice with people who have something kind of cosmic happen to them, and in the way it happens, something unexplainable sometimes, and it usually comes, in my experience of talking to people, when people make a very considered, purposeful action towards saying either no to something or a big yes to something without knowing what the outcome is. Yeah. And it kind of feels a bit like that.
You take a leap of faith.
Yeah.
And sometimes it just really works out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was just a real, a blessing, because then it meant, okay, well, I was just going to figure this out once I got out, once I got on the other side of it, once I rested. I had like saved a bit of money, and I was like, not loads, but I was like, I can basically be unemployed for like 2-3 months if I need to be. That's not very long. There's a fire up my ass to get another job. Yeah. But
you could if you really had
to. Rest.
Yeah.
I could rest for a
month.
And
it sounded like you needed that.
Big time. I mean, I didn't
you didn't because
I
you went straight into it. And did you have to work a notice period as well?
I had a longer notice period that I negotiated down.
That's good.
So I ended up working a month.
Well, it's good to know. I really like to hear that, and it's good to know that people can do that, because I don't really think that people know they can negotiate their notice period down.
Yeah.
And I learned recently that you can, and I think that's useful for people to know.
It's in your contract, but if you have like extenuating circumstances, or if clearly you are, I played the health card, I was happy to say that. I was like, I am burnt out as shit.
Yeah.
I am on the verge of collapse. As you well know, because, people witnessed it, I had a panic attack over there a couple of weeks ago. Like, I am done. I really am done. And I cannot be here for 3 months.
Yeah.
Because that was my notice, 3 months.
Yeah.
So I'm not doing that. And, the HR team were very compassionate, very empathetic. And they were like, we recognize that that's not the right thing for you. So, screw the contract. We're happy to
help.
Yeah, we're happy to do that. So it was just a month in the end. And then, I think I had maybe a couple of weeks off or something. And I actually did some freelance work in those weeks. I got some other random bits and bobs. But then I started at the agency like shortly after. So then, I was, I guess, back as a copywriter.
Yeah.
Like more sort of traditional copywriter. That was I wasn't posting on social media. I wasn't writing. I wasn't writing for social media. I was writing for all sorts of things, for advertising, for digital, for email, for sometimes for social media. But it was like lots of like messaging, lots of like figuring out how to come up with like the best framing for a campaign or framing of an issue for different charities. And that was a really fun job. I was there for a couple of years.
And so that allowed you to go in on the skills, to really go, right, this is a skills job, and I've still got those bits of passion. Like maybe some of the brands had you more passionate than others, but actually not erasure, but the putting to one side of that wholehearted element of Chloe that throws herself into things because you are that kind of person, was able to maybe rest a bit. I mean, I'm not saying you didn't work hard, but I mean,
different kettle of fish.
Yeah, a different kettle of fish. And how did you manage that burnout when you started your new role? Because I know that's what some people experience because not everyone's able to take a break, right? And you sometimes are burnt out for a period at your new job when you're supposed to be quite fresh. Did you have that?
Yeah. Oh, terribly. I mean, the agency life was not in any way as intense as labour. People did work pretty healthy hours. The expectations weren't the same. People weren't, on my ass at, 9 o'clock at night. We need to tweet this now. Like that just was not happening.
Yeah.
It was like, we are an agency and we have quite boundaried relationships with clients. Like they get a certain number of hours, and if they ask for more, they're paying for it.
Yeah.
So, that creates a bit of... that creates a bit of like behavior with clients where they don't take the piss because it's going to cost them.
Yeah.
So it was a totally different ball game, and I felt very, very knackered when I arrived. That summer, I was kind of like, my head was spinning, but I felt just, like the relief was so visceral. I felt like, so like a huge weight had been just off me, and I felt immediately calmer and more relaxed. But the burnout then came with like, again, still being quite emotional. My personal life was in an absolute mess because you just have these,
of course,
you have this neglect in your personal life, right? You're neglecting your relationships, you're neglecting your friendships. Like so many things happened in that kind of 2017, 2018 kind of period where the general election happened, and that was like really intense work. And then I was like, oh yeah, just get through this. And then 2019 comes along, and it's like, oh shit, all of that stuff that happened like a year and a half ago, I'm now kind of catching up with, like feeling the feelings from them.
Right. Yeah.
I'm now feeling the heartache of that relationship ending or the heartache of this thing happening. And you just suddenly, it comes over you really intensely.
Yeah, of course.
But with a less intense job, it was just so much easier.
You're in a sort of safe pair of hands in a way. Yeah. And so, Chloe, you've got this new job, and we've got maybe like 10, 15 minutes left, and I want to sort of come into how that then led on to what you're doing now. So how did that shift start to happen in this second phase of Chloe's career and life?
Well, as you well know, alongside all of this, just throw another little grenade into the mix. I was also a stand-up comedian.
Yes. How we know each other.
Which is how we met. Yeah. So I was doing stand-up comedy while I was at the Labour Party, and then while I worked at my agency, I was doing stand-up then. And it kind of went from something that I took like not seriously at all, like a silly little hobby that was just like a bit of fun, make some friends, you know, challenge myself, write creatively, a bit of an outlet. And then I wanted something playful.
Yeah.
So that's why I took up.
And also for a hobby, you know, you were very good, Chloe, for like a little silly little hobby. Like you were good. You're a good stand-up. Or you are, you know, if are you still doing stand-up?
Absolutely not.
Okay, but you were a good
Absolutely
stand-up.
not, very much past tense. But yeah, it went from being that silly little thing and just something that I did kind of to keep myself a bit sane, really, from Labour. But it did become a lot more serious. Like, it became a second career in a sense, because I was like, I mean, not earning very much money at all. Like, let's be real. You know, you're paid in like, have a pint and a tenner. You know, it's not much money at all. But
that's
like,
a bonus if you get a tenner.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, look at me. Exactly. Like, basically like 1 pence per hour of how much work you've actually put into getting there that day. But yeah, I was actually making a bit of money. As I say, not very much, but it was like, oh yeah, this is like going kind of well. And I got signed to an agent. Like, I had an agent, and yeah, that was like a really big boon, because I was like, oh shit, like I'm not just doing this as like a fucking about hobby.
Yeah.
Someone has recognized potential,
Yeah.
and they are willing to invest in that potential. Oh shit, okay, this is kind of more serious. And I created a comedy night with some friends. Like, we co-created a night called The Lol Word.
Oh, I remember The Lol Word. Yeah.
Which was so much fun. They're still going. They're still at it. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen. And I think my friend from school, Naomi, she helped do the artwork. Or she did the artwork for one of your posters once, didn't she? Foggish.
Oh my God.
Yes, yeah.
That's a little connection.
Yeah, a little connection. But I remember how much I loved that poster. Shout out to Naomi. But also, I remember the Lol Word poster, because you were up in Edinburgh and you had like regular, was it weekly or monthly? Or
Yeah, we had a monthly show, and we had a couple of different venues. We were at the Albany in Central, like in a sort of pub cum comedy venue for a little time, and then we did a couple of like kind of sporadic shows at the Soho Theatre.
Yes.
And then we got in with them.
Yes.
So then we were there like more. I don't know if permanently is the right word, but it was more of like a relationship. We had a regular relationship.
Yeah, good old Soho Theatre. I absolutely love them.
My favourite venue on the planet. Yeah, the best place. And that was, you know, game changing again, because then you're like, oh, we're not just fucking about in a pub basement. We are in the leading comedy club.
I mean, that's huge, Chloe. That's really interesting as well, when you're talking about having an agent and like how these things are happening, it's great that it's happening. It doesn't sound like it's super, you're like pushing. It's like, oh no, we're getting this kind of outside recognition that we and I should have a platform.
Yeah. I mean, so much work went into it, obviously. That
of course.
So much, so much like, you know, kissing a lot of frogs, shall we say, a lot of like crappy gigs and a lot of like practice gigs that, you know, weren't super nice for me personally, you know, and sometimes the Lol Word, we took on some gigs that, you know, were really brilliant and some weren't so brilliant. But we did the Vault Festival, which was really fantastic. And that helped to really like propel us as well. And then I'm really going around the houses, but basically I was a stand-up comedian. Yeah. And the stand-up stuff obviously was like scratching an itch I had to be more playful, more creative, more performance and like thinking about, you know, humor and trying to be really live, really present, you know, like on stage, something's going to happen and you're going to have to respond. You've got to be there. You've got to be connected. But I wasn't actually feeling that. Like, that was the aim. That's what I thought it would achieve for me, but it wasn't actually happening. I felt very stifled by comedy. There was so much admin that was really, really, really time consuming and not very much fun. And I'm not very loosey-goosey. I'm not someone who can improvise very easily. I love a script. I love practicing. I love writing something, because I'm a copywriter. I love writing something and it be basically fucking bang perfect. And then stand-up comedy is not that.
Yeah.
Like, you have to just roll with whatever happens on stage.
Yeah, there's a percentage you can prepare for, and there's a percentage you have to leave completely open.
Yeah.
And you really have to, like, as much as you want to, like, diminish that percentage down to, like, nothing, you really can't if you're going to have a good gig sometimes.
100%. And sometimes I would really take that moment and it would be really magical. Like, something would happen and I would respond and it would be magic, literal magic. But then, you know, other times I'd like chastise myself. I'd get off stage and be like, God damn it, like, I didn't prepare for that. Because I'm a perfectionist, I'm a control freak. So it just wasn't like working for me. I wasn't enjoying it. I wasn't like really like taking the opportunity that comedy was giving me and like running with it and relishing it. So I decided to give up after the pandemic or during the pandemic because gigs were so much harder anyway, right? Like you had to do online gigs. I hated online gigs. You couldn't feel the room. You couldn't feel energy.
100%.
They were just soulless. So I decided I'm not going to do that. I don't want to do that. That's horrible. So then it just kind of petered out really. And it was an active decision at some point, but prior to that decision it had petered, and I was like, I don't want to do this. Like my agent's putting me up for these like, you know, online gigs or whatever, and I'm just not interested. And I feel terrible to keep turning them down, but I'm just not. I don't want to do it. And then I didn't do comedy for maybe a year or something, but some friends of mine were getting married. And they were talking about the struggle of finding a celebrant to do their wedding who they felt really comfortable with. They're a queer couple, 2 women. And they were saying like, oh, wouldn't it be great if a friend of ours could do the wedding? Someone who is queer, someone who is funny, someone who really loves to perform and is really comfortable in that space and taking up that space. Someone who'll really command the moment, someone who's a great writer, And I was sat in the back of a car with them. We were driving to go for an evening out together. And I just thought, are they
were you
hinting?
just
like,
I'm here?
Is this a setup? Like, am I being set up? And then they kind of like, you know, they were like being a bit playful and a bit
they were hinting, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I said, oh, that's really interesting. I've never thought of that. I don't know how to do that, but I'd give it a bash.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, that would be great. Yeah, if you would. And they just obviously were like desperately trying to get me to say that I would do it without asking, will you marry us?
Yeah.
It was an intense question. So it just literally went from there because it was a culmination of these skills, a culmination of this experience, something I'd never considered, didn't even know it was a job, never even heard of like a celebrant, didn't know what that was at all. And I thought, God, do I have to like go to the local council and get registered? Do I have to do a course? Do I have to become like a registrar? Like, what is this job? And I only through research discovered that it is a purely ceremonial role. It's not a legally binding service. People have to get married either in a church setting or they have to go to like a registry office, you know, like the local council have to kind of marry you. But a celebrant is someone who's in the middle. It's not legally binding, but it's ceremonial. It's the person who spins the story, who writes the story, who commands the moment and says something 100% original. Whereas a registrar does the kind of like in sickness and in health, till death us do part, the sort of totally template wedding.
Yes, right.
It's like 10 or 15 minutes long. It's a series of statements about the legality of marriage.
Yeah, and actually when you think about it, like, think how hard you work in comedy to get an audience of that size.
I know.
And it's like, if you've got an audience, I mean, I know they're not simply an audience, but it kind of is, right? It's a little show. Oh. Why on earth would you waste it on just a few familiar words so that everyone can get on? Like, you've got everyone sat down, may as well make it. Yeah, exactly.
100%. And for me, I was like, these are the best gigs I've ever had. Because you walk into the room, everyone is silent. You're not going to get heckled. Everyone is ready to have a good time.
Yeah.
No one's thinking, when the fuck is this bitch going on? Because I'm here for the headliner. Do you know what I mean? Like, who the fuck is she? I'm not interested. I'm going to sit on my phone or I'm going to chat or whatever. You don't have to win anyone over because everyone is ready to be thrilled.
Yeah.
So you make a joke. Honestly, Jen, these jokes are like, you know, they're like 3 out of 10s. They're barely jokes. They're just like a little sprinkle of like witticism, you know, and people are like thigh slapping. They just go off because they're like, well, they weren't expecting it to be funny for one. Like people don't expect to like have a hoot at a wedding ceremony. That's for the after party. That's for the reception. That's for when everyone's pissed on the dance floor. That's when the funny stuff happens, or the fun stuff.
Yeah.
They don't expect the ceremony, which is very typically traditional, quite dull, a bit kind of like been there, done that, seen this 100 times kind of thing.
Yeah.
Just get it over with before we can like get on with the fun stuff. They don't expect, the expectations are so low.
Yeah.
But they're ready to have a nice time. They're ready to engage. They're not on their phones. They're not thinking about really anything else. They are there in the moment. There's a hush that descends upon the room. There is a sacredness to that space. It's all about the sort of art of it being this like space. I mean, there must be some science to it, because I don't know how it is achieved, but it is achieved.
Yeah.
And a celebrant is that person that brings it all together, which is so similar to stand-up, but I don't have anything working against me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Absolutely.
everyone's up for a good time.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
their expectations of being amused, being being kind of delighted, being entertained is like reasonably low. So of course then I'm comparing this to like tough gigs.
Yeah, I mean, you've
got to work your ass, right?
Yeah, you've cut your teeth in. It just took me back to like doing a primary teaching like placement, which is really hard because you're up till early hours doing like lesson plans and then you go into school, and it depends what kind of school, but I always felt like my placements were much harder. So it's great when you have like a really tough field where you can cut your teeth. I mean, it's like, it feels like chalk and cheese, but you've got the skills and you're ready to go.
Oh yeah.
And so this first time that you did it was the whole preparation, the whole way you did it. Have you been able to use that going forwards now?
Yeah, 100%. I figured out how to do it through like so much research, through asking other people, getting lots of advice, and then just kind of also like following my own intuition. That was another thing that I really learned from the experience, that I had never done it before, but I was like, I actually know how to do this. And the way that was kind of like the way that I figured that out was two things. The first was I did the wedding, the first one. I had no idea if I had like done a good job. I had no idea. The reaction in the room was sensational. I was so in the moment. I was present. I felt really connected. I cried with happiness. I was just thrilled.
All completely contrasting feelings to what, going back to that labour moment. Yeah. Like it's just like yin and yang, isn't it?
Oh, 100% a different professional experience. Yeah, exactly. And that was really great. And then afterwards, the feedback. That was the first thing that said to me, follow your intuition, because you are right on the money. You really know how to do this. There was the venue manager who was the wedding coordinator, and she was there like with the venue, and she was like, oh, so how long have you been doing this? And I was like, oh, I've never done it before. First time. They're close friends. And she was shook. She was like, you are joking. She was like, I have seen over 100 weddings in that room alone. I've seen over 100. That's the best wedding I've ever seen. And I was like,
great feedback.
I was like, I'm writing that on a website. Like,
you've already got the website plan in your head by this point, right?
Yeah, and like, I've got my marketing materials suddenly just like fabricated out of thin air. Like, oh, okay, this is major. So that was like the first thing. And then the second thing was, I did a baby naming ceremony for some friends. That was another thing that was like, I'm cutting my teeth, I'm figuring it out. Yeah. Do I want to do this professionally? I've got some friends who've asked me to do that. So generous, lots of trust put in me. So I was like, yeah, I'll give it a go. Never been to one. Don't know what they contain. Haven't got a fucking clue. But I was like, yeah, great. And they had another child before. So they had already done this with their first child. So they said, we'll send you the script of our first child's naming ceremony.
Oh, great. Okay.
But I didn't get that until after I had written their naming ceremony. So I wrote their naming ceremony for their second child, and that was like something I was pretty pleased with. I was like, I don't quite know what the hell I'm doing, but I'm happy with this as a piece. And then they sent me this first one, and again I was like, interesting. That's interesting, because the first one, it wasn't terrible. It didn't suck. It was very nice, but it was about babies. It was about children conceptually. It was about the family. It was about what it means to be a child and what it means to bring a child into the world, which is so beautiful, so meaningful, so interesting. But I had done this completely different thing where I had talked about my friend's experience of the first year of parenthood and the birth that they had, because the birth was amazing. They had an amazing birth.
Okay, got
and
you.
Her character, her little character, the baby's like nature, her personality. And there was nothing of that in the first ceremony that they sent me that was for their first child. There was nothing personalized to them.
Yes.
It was a ceremony about children and families
as a theme, right? Yes.
Whereas I had written something about them,
very personal.
Completely. I couldn't have ever said it ever again. Yeah. It was a ceremony I was going to deliver once, and that was it, because it wouldn't have been relevant to anyone else.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I'm that kind of celebrant.
Yes.
Like, I write stories. I
Yeah.
tell people stories. That's what I do. I don't talk about these sort of grandiose concepts of marriage, childhood, family. I write stories about people and their love, their relationships, their experiences, their quirks and their values. And that, again, was like another moment where I was like, okay, I'm not going to do this necessarily the same as every celebrant. There's going to be a different approach that lots of people would take, but that's my approach.
Yeah, that's your USP, Chloe.
Yeah.
And I mean, already I'm like, I need Chloe. Chloe, we've got literally like a minute or so left, right? So in this time, can you say what it is that you love about your job now? Like, and how is it different?
Oh God.
I know that's a really short time.
They're not even comparable. I mean, like sitting in an office all day, like having men shout at me versus like I have a co-working space, or I work from home, or I work with friends, and I travel a lot because I'm meeting people and I'm delivering ceremonies. So I'm like all over the country. You can't compare them. They're so different. Interestingly, the skills are actually quite a lot of the time similar. You have to market yourself as a celebrant, right?
Yes.
That's another whole skill set that obviously you don't think you have to do when you become like a small business owner. But like, I have an Instagram, I have a website, I do all of this copywriting. So I'm like, okay, I remember how to do that stuff because I've done it.
Which is brilliant.
times.
Yeah, that's so incredibly useful, having all those skills to sell yourself, and a big part of the job.
Big part of the job, yeah.
And also the stand-up sprinkled in, obviously, in the storytelling.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's an amazing amalgamation. And where can we find you, by the way? Have you got a website, Chloe?
Yeah. I'm chloegreenscelebrant.com.
Okay.
Or on Instagram, same again, Chloe Green Celebrant.
Oh, I really am just like, I need to make sure I've got Chloe there for when the time, when it's happening, because you've very much sold yourself just through your passion, really, like your passion for it. And yeah, I mean, it's such a fantastic turnaround, Chloe, and a really interesting story. And thank you for being so honest as well. I'm
sorry just to basically have like a therapy session about working at the Labour Party rather than talk about my actual fucking job, which is a celebrant.
No, this story is perfect. And I want to end on a final question, Chloe, which is, would you do anything differently?
No.
Nothing.
If I had done anything differently, I don't know if I would now be a celebrant. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
All of those things, all of those constituent parts created the skill set and the motivation to do something. You know, even the bad stuff. It was kind of like, well, I don't want to do that. I'm going to move away from that. Even that was in itself, again, data. It was stuff I had to figure out.
Yes.
I could easily be doing another social media management job right now.
Yeah.
If any of those other things hadn't happened. So, or working for the Labour Party still, maybe if it hadn't been quite as bad as it was. But no, I can't think what could change to create the same outcome. And I am so happy with the outcome that I can't regret any of it.
Well, props to you for following your inner data.
Thank you.
And I think that's a great tip for anyone to take away. You know, follow your data.
Yeah. What does the data tell you?
The data tell you. Thank you, Chloe.
Thank you so much, Jen.